everybody who doesn't know me, my name is Sarah Soucie Eyberg. I am one of the at-large board members for the Minnesota Statewide Alumni Chapter. Thanks so much to everybody who came today. I'm really looking forward to this presentation and appreciate your patience with our technical issues. If you put questions in the chat, I will make sure that they get to our panelists. But first, I'm going to introduce Molly Giffin, and her role is as a senior access consultant in the Disability Resource Center at the University of Minnesota. And so her expertise is in helping students with disabilities get accommodations so they can be academically successful. Hopefully I said that right, Molly. She has a few PowerPoint slides for us. So you don't have to hold questions, throw them in the chat, and then as things go, I will make sure to get them answered. And then if I miss any, hopefully Dan or Corey or someone can jump in and help me out here. But Molly, why don't you go ahead with your presentation, and then I'm gonna still try and see if I can't get our second panelist in here.
Okay, sounds good. Are you seeing my PowerPoint? Okay.
Yeah, we got it.
Perfect, thank you. Well, thank you, Sarah. Like she said, my name is Molly Giffin. I'm Senior Access Consultant. I use she, her pronouns. I work in the Disability Resource Center. I don't know if everyone that's here today is a graduate or if anyone is still in law school, but my side of things in the Disability Resource Center is to focus on academic accommodations. There is another unit of my office that supports employees of the university. So not like my specific area of focus, but I can certainly try to answer some questions if they are more employment related or connect afterwards if there are any employment related questions. But I wanted to start out with just setting a little bit of a frame in that sharing the definition of disability from the ADA. Some or all of you may be already familiar with this, but just to kind of set a little bit of the framework. And then I'll talk a little bit about the social model of disability, which is the model that the Disability Resource Center uses, purpose of accommodations, and then talking more specifically about what the process looks like for law school students at the University of Minnesota. I have a access statement on the slide as well that just says to take care of yourself during this presentation. So feel free to eat or stretch or to keep your camera off, whatever you need to do to kind of take care of yourself. So the definition of disability states that it is a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities. And there's several listed on this slide, including sleeping, seeing, speaking, learning, breathing, self-care, reading, working. So I share this because one of the questions that I receive a lot is, or one of the comments that I receive a lot when meeting with students is just that not realizing that their disability condition qualifies them for accommodations, not knowing that they would be eligible to meet with someone in this Disability Resource Center to talk about accommodations. I think for some people, they may hear the word disability and in their mind kind of goes to like physical disability conditions, which it includes those, but is also more broad than that as well. This slide is showing about 9 different size boxes that are all different colors, and each box has a different disability condition in it. So the largest box in the middle is mental health. So that is signifying the largest group of students who are registered with our office. So about 80% of students identify as having a mental health condition that could be co-occurring with another condition as well, but pretty high prevalence. Secondary to mental health is ADHD. And then I would say next to that are chronic health conditions, learning disabilities, autism spectrum disorder, and then after those brain injuries, than students who are deaf or hard of hearing, blind or low vision, or who have mobility or physical disabilities. So that just kind of shows, I think, the types of conditions that students are registered with the Disability Resource Center for. Again, I think a fair amount of students may not realize that their mental health condition qualifies them for a disability, but it absolutely does, and happy to have more conversations about that. So I also just wanted to share a little bit about the social model of disability, which is what my office uses to think about accommodations and disability. So this model is really saying that we as humans are diverse in our bodies and our minds. Our abilities will likely shift throughout our lives depending on what setting we're in, a culture that we are a part of, or our role. So I think about this in that what a person might need as a student might look different than what they'll need as a working professional. And that's okay, depending on the environment that we're in. Our health may show up for us in different ways. And then what gets valued as ability or devalued as disability are social decisions. Kind of generally the environments that we are in are typically not created with disability in mind or with accessibility in mind. So accommodations are really meant to facilitate access and to modify things or aspects in our environment so that they are more inclusive and accessible. So that's kind of what the social model of disability is, and part of the frame that we use when determining reasonable accommodations. So I already kind of touched on this a little bit, but the purpose of accommodations is really to make modifications or adjustments that are going to facilitate access and inclusion in academics without compromising academic integrity or the essential requirements. On the employment side of things, looks pretty much the same in that accommodations are meant to modify the job application process or the employment itself without compromising those essential job functions. So again, like I said, my role is in academic accommodations, but my counterparts in U-Return, which is the DRC office that supports employees, work with the employee and their department and HR to help explore reasonable accommodations in the workplace. And we commonly support folks who are both students and employees. So if someone is a law school student and a TA, for example, we can work with that person on both their academic and employment related needs. So then lastly, I just wanted to talk about kind of what the process is for law school students who are wanting to explore accommodations. So this is really a collaborative process between my office, the DRC, and the Student Affairs Office. So kind of how this works is that a student would register with me. We would talk about what the academic impact is of their disability condition. So this really looks like having a conversation around how does their health show up for them? What does it mean for them to experience whatever disability condition they have? And we can talk about this both in like generalities and specific to their classes. So sometimes it's easier to talk about, how their, let's use anxiety, for example, what their anxiety looks like in their everyday life versus how it's showing up for them in their classes. And that could look like while sitting in a lecture or taking an exam or studying at home. We can talk about accommodations really anytime someone is asked to show up as a student. So it's not just when taking an exam. There's other parts of being a law school student that is more than just taking exams. So we want to make sure every part of the student experience is accessible. So we really have that conversation. We do utilize documentation from a provider. So documentation can be helpful to verify what the disability condition is. We can also gather some information from the provider around, like from their perspective, what are the academic impacts, if they have any recommendations for accommodations. But we really do place a strong emphasis on the student self-report, knowing that the student knows themselves the best. They're an expert on their body and on their mind, and they're able to share from their perspective kind of what their needs are. Through that conversation, if we would determine any accommodations, my next step then is to consult with the Assistant Dean of Students, who at the University of Minnesota, that's Dean Keys, and she is really looking at accommodations from a faculty or departmental perspective, really keeping the learning outcomes in mind. And then we work together to ensure that the accommodations are reasonable, with kind of thinking about all of those factors. So once the accommodation is approved by Dean Keys, then I would send the student their accommodation letter, who would then send that letter to the Student Affairs Office. So that's really just how we're kind of formalizing this process. You'll notice that throughout this process, faculty are really not involved. And that's pretty consistent from my understanding with other law schools, both around in the area and around the country as well, is that the Student Affairs Office is the point of contact with the Disability Services Office. And this is all to preserve blind grading. So there's a lot of stop measures in place to ensure students' confidentiality and privacy. And so all in an effort to make sure that there is not bias involved and to preserve blind grading. And then the Student Affairs Office are the ones who are coordinating exam accommodations. They can also provide support with communicating to a faculty member if needed, recognizing that there are more accommodations that a student might need other than just exam accommodations. So if a student needs to sit in a certain spot in the classroom, that would be something that a faculty would need to assist with more than I could do in the moment. So sometimes there is a need to communicate directly with faculty, and then we would talk about ways to do that again don't disclose private health information to faculty. And then I'll always tell students that accommodations can be adjusted throughout the semester or the academic year. So, what we discuss in that initial meeting is by no means like a student's one shot to get accommodations. Our health needs change. Sometimes we, go down a different treatment path, and that can create different impacts. So we can always adjust accommodations and rethink what modifications need to be made depending on how the student's disability condition is looking. So I know that was just kind of like a brief overview, but wanted to keep it kind of more high level and just kind of talk about kind of the framing for disability and framing for what the accommodations process might look like. Again, if there's any questions around like employment side of things, I can do my best to answer, but may also connect with one of my colleagues who work specifically in employment related accommodations.
Thank you so much, Molly. And you guys, if you have questions, please put them in the chat. I have a few of my own if no one else does. But I guess one thing I was wondering was, since you work with both law students and undergrad students, do you see a difference in either the type of accommodations or the prevalence of needing accommodations? Maybe you could kind of give us some idea of what it looks like. Obviously, all these things are very, confidential and private to people. So there may be more people with these accommodations than we would generally think or know about. Would you be willing to share some information on that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think the biggest difference is really just in how law school classes are structured versus undergraduate classes, because as you all know, there's not often a whole lot of like coursework in law school classes. There might just be kind of that one final exam, and that's the whole grade for the class. So there's fewer, there can often be fewer assignments, fewer, and like more weight is on that final exam. So for undergraduate students, there might be more of an emphasis on looking at accommodations around individual assignments, whereas that may not always apply for law school students. So I think that's one major difference, is just how the classes are structured. Certainly the learning outcomes are different for an undergraduate class than they would be for a law school class. So that is also taken into consideration. It's just what is being measured in the class. What is the student intended to get out of the class? And we really keep that in mind to ensure that the accommodations are reasonable.
Okay.
And then I think also keeping in mind what law school is setting a student up for is kind of preparing them for that next step as a practicing attorney, a practicing lawyer. So keeping in mind what are going to be the expectations of someone once they graduate from law school, and ensuring that we're kind of setting a student up so that there's not like a huge gap between accommodations that they would be receiving in law school versus at a future job.
Okay, great. And I think, Tim, can you hear me? Did you join us? Are you there?
Can you guys hear me?
I can. All right. Awesome. Thanks everybody with your patience with that. And thanks, Tim, for working through the tech issues. So since Tim is with us now, I'm just going to introduce him briefly, and I'll catch you up on where we're at so far, Tim. But Tim Smitley is a recent graduate from Mitchell Hamline School of Law, and he is actually looking at opening his own practice, helping disabled folks, as well as do some landlord tenant law. And Tim, you'll have to tell me if your plans have changed since the last we talked. But thanks so much for working through that. And I'd love to have a couple more minutes just to wrap up with part of Molly's presentation, if that's all right, Tim, and then we'll get into kind of so Molly's explained to us from her perspective and the university perspective side of providing accommodations. Then I was wondering if you might share kind of what your own experiences were through law school and as you're navigating the bar exam, and also starting practice. Does that sound okay?
Yeah, that sounds good.
All right, awesome. So again, any questions for Molly, please put them in the chat, or we're kind of a small group, so you're welcome to unmute and ask if you like. And Molly, thank you so much for the overview. That's really helpful. I think one of the other things that is relatable or comes up for law students and attorneys is how some of these disabilities that maybe existed throughout their life maybe went undiagnosed for a long time and is new. So how can the school help people adapt to what might be a new diagnosis when they don't know even how to deal with it in their regular life?
Yeah, that's another great question. I have been meeting with a fair amount of 3Ls this week, actually, who are kind of in that boat of recently diagnosed, are still in this space of understanding what is this disability condition, what does this diagnosis mean for me? Maybe someone is just recently diagnosed with ADHD, for example, and are kind of in that space of understanding this new identity and understanding how they learn and what might be some strategies. And so it's okay for a student who is newly diagnosed to meet with me and have a discussion around accommodations, knowing that also that things may change as they learn more about themselves, as they learn more about what strategies help to manage their impacts, that we can adjust accommodations along the way. So certainly like I think I mentioned earlier in a previous slide, that our abilities change throughout our lives. Who we are as high school students looks different than who we are as law school students, and then after that. So certainly different health conditions will arise. And if and when that occurs, we just go through kind of our regular process to talk about what that's looking like and then adjust if needed down the road.
Great. Thanks, Molly. Tim, if you'd like, at this point, maybe you can, and Molly, I'm sure we'll have some more questions for you and like some more things you can contribute to. But Tim, would you just kind of tell us a little bit about your experience and what it's been like for you?
Yeah, during law school.
I know that you had, obviously this has been a lifelong condition for you. So actually, if you want to talk about the difference between undergrad and law school to kind of coincide with what Molly was saying, or what different needs you may have had, I think that would be really helpful. And then especially as you're transitioning out of school into practice, that would be great.
Yeah, so I don't know if everyone knows this yet, but I am blind and I didn't lose most of my functional vision until I was 14. So from that point on, I was learning in high school how to live with blindness. So in undergrad, it was very supportive and easy to get accommodations. I didn't need a whole lot, just access to the right programs for technology and notes for school. Law school was a little interesting because I went to Mitchell Hamline and it was shortly after the merger. So I was the guinea pig case on how to handle a student that needed, accommodations that weren't just extra time on tests or a quiet room. So the first year was, or at least the first semester was a little interesting. When you're told that coming into law school is not something you necessarily want to hear, but I just rolled with it because it wasn't the first time that it's happened. But Mitchell Hamline was really good at getting me what I needed. And for the most part, all I do need is my textbooks and assignments in an alternative format. I do everything auditorily. So through my computer, I have a screen reader program that reads everything out loud. So I needed to make sure that I had electronic copies of my textbooks and the PowerPoints or notes that professors were writing on the board. So I would have an in-class note taker who'd share notes with me. And then I'd get the PowerPoint slides. And for the most part, that works out. I guess I don't know of any professors by name that had some issues, but I guess there were some behind the scenes stuff that the school advocated for me on my behalf and got things straightened out.
Okay. And was that more of like a reticence for someone to alter what they were doing to accommodate you, do you know? Or was it just because, obviously if you're the guinea pig for the admin, you might have been the first student that a professor had to accommodate in a different way.
Yeah, I think it was just not wanting to adapt to a new change for the most part.
Okay. And now I know you graduated last spring, right? Congratulations.
Thanks.
And you're now navigating the bar application process, or all that's done, right? But you're seeking to take the bar in February, right?
Yep.
And so what has that process been like?
Well, I found out that the bar application is not very accessible.
Will you tell us about what that looks like from your perspective? And for those of you who maybe don't know, I had the pleasure of having Tim through an externship program at Mitchell Hamline work with me and my firm a little bit for part of last year. And there were a lot of issues that he's presented with that I just had no idea. Even though I served disabled clients, I just hadn't experienced. So I really appreciate having him here to kind of teach me about what he's been faced with in something as easy as you think, oh, well, all PDFs are the same, right? But that's not the case, right, Tim?
Right. It really depends on how the PDF was initially created. So for PDFs to work the best with screen readers, they need to go through the OCR process, which I think the newer versions of Adobe do that automatically, and newer models of scanners do it automatically. But when it came to the bar application, the biggest issue I had was not that they had it as a fillable PDF, but it wasn't tagged correctly to let me know that when my cursor was entering the areas to fill in. So, I mean, I had issues even just trying to figure out how to put my name on the form.
Wow.
Because it had like a box. Oh.
I was going to say, you mean the Board of Law Examiners isn't on top of like the most advanced technology just automatically? That's so weird that their PDF would be so old that it would be inaccessible. So
yeah, I let them know that when I submitted the application. So, maybe they've made changes.
Yeah, what did you have to do to work around it?
I had my now wife do it for me.
I was kind of wondering if that's what ended up happening, because I know even for some of our meetings, sometimes, you know, she would help us get connected, but that's not accessible. Well, that's not an accommodation that they should have under the ADA, right? And maybe Molly.
Right. Like I got so frustrated that I couldn't put more than the first like 2 or 3 letters of my name on the application, that I wasn't going to try and fiddle around with the rest to see what I could and couldn't do. So it was easier to sit there with her for the however many hour and a half, 2 hours it took to plug in all the information.
That's tough. So what was their response when you brought it to their attention?
They were happy to know about it. They said that they liked getting the feedback. I don't know if it ever made it to the appropriate person.
So tell me about how are you going to sit for the bar exams? What kind of accommodations will you be having in order to take it?
Yeah, so I will be in a totally different room because I use a screen reader, so it talks out loud with a proctor. They're going to be giving me the test on a USB drive because similar to law school, the testing software that they have you take when you do it electronically, that blocks you from using all the other programs on your computer.
Oh, sure.
Also prevents screen readers from working. So it works too well.
Right. Awesome. So you won't be using ExamSoft, right? Is that right?
Right. Yeah. Because it currently, as far as I know, it still blocks all the different screen reader programs.
Okay. Interesting.
So they'll be giving me the test on a USB drive that my screen reader can read out loud. And for the multiple choice section, they're going to allow me to have like an open Word document that I can start a numbered list on to keep track of my answers. But as I'm typing them on my computer, I also have to say them out loud so that the proctor, who will also be the scribe and reader in case the technology fails, can enter it in on the actual testing form.
Okay.
And then I'm permitted to use my laptop to type up the essay portions, which I think I either will save them to a USB drive that they'll print off, or I'll just print them from my computer when I'm there, and then they include it with the rest of the test.
Okay. And is this kind of similar to accommodations you got while in law school for testing?
Yeah, it's pretty similar, except in law school, I wasn't proctored. I don't know if that's because they didn't have enough staff at Mitchell Hamline to supervise me, but I always thought it was interesting that they were like, yep, we know that this ExamSoft doesn't work, but here's your test, and here you can go sit in an empty room without a camera or anything, you know, honor code.
Yeah, well, I think that honor code, it tends to be a little bit of what everybody's dealing with in law school too. I wanted to ask Kim, part of what we did together when you worked with me was to kind of look at the practice of law and ways that's inaccessible for folks, or ways that it could be better. And I was wondering if you'd share some of your thoughts on that.
Yeah, do you have any specific areas in mind?
Well, Well, like we had discussed before, I know it's not just an issue with the Board of Law Examiners, right? There are some court forms, PDFs that are so ancient as to be unreadable, and maybe some other challenges that you came across when starting to practice law in the externship setting.
Yeah, so the PDF is a big thing. Whether it's the court forms not being tagged properly to actually be able to write inside of them, kind of a thing like the bar exam, or just being readable in general can be worked on. I found working with you, Sarah, like different case management software isn't always accessible. And that's more of an issue with the company designing it than like the board of law examiners.
Right.
But that could present some interesting situations where if you're trying to be primarily paperless and wanting clients to e-sign through a portal, if the portal is not set up to work with a screen reader or other assistive technology, it's not going to do clients with disabilities any good.
Right. That was a specific issue that you and I had too, I think, right? Because my case management software uses Locus, and it wasn't once it was PDF and sent to you within that portal, it wasn't working for you to sign, if I remember right.
Oh yeah, I remember that. I couldn't actually read what I was signing, so yeah, I signed your confidentiality in good faith.
You just trust me, right?
Yep.
I feel like there was something else too that was kind of a practical experience. But can you tell me, as you're approaching starting your own practice, what are some things that you're going to be keeping in mind to make sure that your own firm is accessible for all kinds of clients?
So I've had that in mind since I started it. So I've purposefully been picking out different equipment items that are either going to help me, or like I mentioned, the scanners that will automatically turn things into accessible PDFs as they're being scanned, is really helpful. I've been trying to work with different case management softwares to ask them about how accessible they are. So like currently I'm leaning towards Microsoft's version just because the rest of their programs work really well with screen readers. But an interesting one that I hadn't known about that I learned recently was like when it comes to live captioning for video meetings, what Google's platform is the best for doing the live captions.
Oh,
so that was something I didn't know about.
Did you say it was Google Meet, Tim?
Yeah. Is that what Google now uses? I don't keep track of their platform updates.
I think so. That's the only one I'm familiar with. So that one's best for, did you say transcript or live captioning?
Live captioning.
Okay, that's cool. What else? What about Zoom school, Tim? How was that for the end of your law school career?
I liked it and I didn't. I missed being in person and being able to see everyone. But the assistant disability director at Mitchell Hamline and I joked around that when we transitioned, I was probably in the best position to do so because listening to everything on Zoom isn't really any different from listening to it in person.
That's funny. So what did you do though in terms of note taking or because you had note taker for your live classes, right? So did you have to do anything different, or was there someone on Zoom that was taking notes for you?
Someone in Zoom was taking notes for me. The last few classes I took were more skills based than black letter law that would have tests in them, so that worked out for me.
Sure.
And so I think my fall and spring last year, I didn't really do anything that needed significant test taking. So when we transitioned in spring 2020, the note takers that had already volunteered at the beginning of the semester just kept doing it and would email me the notes like they had been before.
Okay, that makes sense.
So I personally wasn't interrupted too much.
That's good.
And it saved me an hour one-way bus ride every day. So
Sure.
I liked it.
Even more accessible, right, than before.
Little bit. That's like another thing I think people don't necessarily realize too is transportation can be a big barrier to people with disabilities. You know, we've been talking a lot on the digital tech side of things. But even like the placement of a law firm could be an issue if it's not near a bus line.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that when thinking about, I think some law firms might consider something like bus line or public transportation as a plus when it comes to getting to their office, and certainly think about parking, but not necessarily, more for ease for people rather than actually making sure that they're physically accessible. Molly, I wonder if you had anything on that question, with what changed in terms of accommodations when the pandemic hit with remote schooling.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with what Tim has shared, in that some things were a lot more accessible and other aspects were really inaccessible. And it just kind of depends on the student and what their needs were. I think for a lot of people, the focus piece of being in classes fully on Zoom was really challenging. Some students reported to me like it's really difficult to maintain focus, and I get easily distracted because I'm thinking about throwing a load of laundry in, or I've got dishes to wash, or it's so easy to like pull up another tab and to be doing something else. So just like the maintaining focus piece of it. I think for a lot of students, the isolation also played a big role in people's mental health and just overall well-being, in not having that sense of community and that sense of belonging with other students, and not being able to form those relationships in a stressful kind of high stakes environment, I think was really tough for a lot of people. So I know that trickled down into like mental health services on campus being like a lot of students utilizing those counseling services on campus and needing that additional mental health support. But then there's other aspects like the transportation piece, like Tim was mentioning, that helped out a lot. I'm thinking about intersecting identities and students who are also parents, and being able to provide childcare and just do other things at home, tend to other pieces of their lives, while also being a law school student. So accessible and inaccessible at the same time.
Yeah. We have a question now. This person says, what challenges do attorneys with disabilities face in a work culture sense, and what could the legal field do better to support attorneys with disabilities? And that's for both Tim and Molly. So if you guys have any insight in that, and Molly, you might have some just from the law school culture side too, that certainly extends to the legal field. But Tim, did you have thoughts?
I feel like this one's a little harder for me to answer because I haven't moved into the career part yet.
Yeah. And did you have issues with, say, more the social aspects or sort of the culture within law school with your disabilities, Tim?
Yeah, social part, it got hard, but I made do with finding ways to meet with people over Zoom for like little happy hours or board game nights, and different things like that. What was the second part, Sarah?
Oh, no, just from like a culture, social with friends is one thing, but kind of a culture within the student, or if there were any student organizations that maybe you had tried and were less accessible or weren't accommodating.
I didn't have much experience with that. Most of my time was spent, trying to keep up with my classes. So I didn't actually participate in a whole lot of the student organizations just because of the time commitment it already took to be successful in law school with a disability.
Yeah, that's a good point. That some of the things like Phi Alpha Delta that we're here for today is a student organization that a lot of us joined to help us, be more successful in our legal careers, but wouldn't have necessarily had the time for. Molly, do you have any insight to that particular question?
Yeah, I think what comes to mind is just the stigma is very real, both in law school and in pretty much any field, unfortunately, not just the law field. But I think the way that it shows up for me in my work is I meet with a lot of students who express a lot of concerns around registering with the Disability Resource Center because they're nervous about other people knowing, or they don't want to feel like they are getting an advantage or a leg up with accommodations, or they're worried about is registering with the DRC going to show up on a transcript, and is a future employer going to know? And I think the root of all of that is that there's stigma, and that society is very ableist in terms of the way that we create jobs and the way that we create work environments. And so I think part of combating that stigma is a really easy thing, I think, is doing something like an access statement in the beginning of a conversation or beginning of a presentation, because it lets other people know that you're thinking about and caring about disability and access and inclusion. So I think by sharing some kind of framework of please take care of yourself, and we understand that disability is an aspect of diversity, and we welcome all of those aspects of diversity, including disability. I think that lets others know that this is going to be a safe and inclusive space to be in. And then it might open the door to someone having a conversation about, what, I'm really struggling with this aspect of my job. And now that I know that it's okay to talk to you about that, I feel comfortable doing so. So I think just sharing that you're thinking about disability as an aspect of diversity will hopefully combat some of the stigma that is really prevalent in our society, and may help others to feel more comfortable with reaching out.
Awesome.
Molly actually reminded me of something, Sarah.
Oh yeah, let's hear it, Tim.
I believe I talked to you about it over the summer. I was trying to find some part-time jobs while I was waiting to take the bar exam, because I had to postpone my July sitting for some family health issues.
Yeah,
and
I'm hearing this. I'm so mad about it still.
And I was pretty blatantly discriminated against during the interview process, because I was told that I wouldn't be a good fit, since the law firm I was interviewing for, how did they do it? They were still very old fashioned and did everything by paper and handwritten notes. And they told me that, I wouldn't be a good fit, and they didn't think there was a way they could accommodate my disability. So they didn't want to move forward with the interview process.
Yeah. And my recollection was that you were actually on the phone. They wanted you to come in kind of last minute for an interview, and you were on the phone with them asking if they could do it via Zoom, because you weren't sure that you could get transportation in the timing that they wanted to, which is something like, if you're relying on public transportation for transportation, you don't get to schedule your own meetings, right? You have to go around how long it would take you to get there. And I believe it was outer metro too, right? It was in the suburbs, maybe.
Yeah, it was like Brooklyn Center, Brooklyn Park, one of the two.
Yeah.
Or, trying to figure out if I was going to Uber there, if it was going to be cost effective, because that can add up quick with needing to get there and back.
Yeah, absolutely. And then they put you on hold. And then when they came back, when you had kind of explained the issue, that's when they gave you we're too old fashioned and can't do anything electronically to possibly accommodate you when we have feedback on assignments.
Yeah. Because with being blind, walking around with either my guide dog or a cane, it's pretty obvious that I have a disability, and it's not something I can, hide per se.
Right.
But if I can avoid talking about it, I try to shine on my own merits and not rely on that for any kind of special treatment, like what Molly was saying.
Yeah.
So I hadn't told them about that in the interview on the phone, because at that point there wasn't a need to, until they wanted to meet with me for a follow-up interview with one of the attorneys who was in charge of HR.
Oh, that part too drives me nuts. This is what I tell the students in the law firm as business owner class too. I said, just because a lawyer owns their own firm does not mean they know how to be a business owner. And that is one of the pieces that is it's not surprising, but it is shocking that you came across that. So again, sorry that happened to you. And I'm still mad about it. It's been several, I think, but man. Okay.
Yeah, I talked to one attorney about it and they said, I should definitely go after them.
Yeah. I mean, you could, it's a pretty blatant violation, right? So you could, but man, what an energy suck that would be too. I think we have another question. Corey?
Yeah, just going off what Tim said and and what Molly said earlier about the employment context. I used to handle a lot of employment discrimination claims, and at our last seminar on gender, we talked about the EEOC process. So just wanted to ask Molly and maybe Tim as well. It's great. It sounds like the schools are being accommodating for the most part, but what's the process for a student or employer if they're not being accommodated? What does that look like?
Yeah, I can speak to that from what the University of Minnesota's process is. So if a student or an employee feels that they are being discriminated against, the process would be for them to make a report to the Equal Opportunity and Affirmative Action Office. The DRC is not an investigatory office, so we are not set up to investigate any reports of discrimination, and that's why EOAA, Equal Opportunity and Affirmative Action, they would be the ones to investigate those reports. So that would be the route that a student or employee would go if they're feeling like if they're being discriminated against. If it's a situation where a student has shared an accommodation letter and they feel that their faculty are not complying with those accommodations, but they're not really sure if it's necessarily discrimination, that's where myself and the Student Affairs Office would get involved to have a conversation and talk about what's going on. So that would likely happen first, potentially before a student would make a discrimination report. But students can file those reports whenever they feel is necessary, and they don't necessarily need to go to me first or go to the Student Affairs Office if they feel like they're being discriminated against.
Do we have any other questions from our audience? I have several more I can do, but it's not as much fun if I'm just grilling you guys and versus other people getting a chance to ask their questions. Okay. So Tim, I want to ask you, because you brought up the issue with that firm. Is there obviously you don't have to disclose anything, in terms of your disability. Is there anything that's changed in your job search or how you're planning to do the next steps after you pass the bar that would be different for you because of your disability?
I'm really planning on embracing the remote work aspect of things. And when I was looking around trying to find other small firms that were still doing some kind of remote opportunities.
Okay.
But a lot of times I was seeing there would be some postings where they would say remote not available. And my plan was, if I was to get an interview, to request remote hours as a reasonable accommodation.
Sure, that makes sense. And Molly, I don't know how much, if you work with students seeking employment or help them work through these kinds of, I would think even some application processes for law firms and legal orgs would maybe have accessibility issues also. So if you have any insight into that kind of job finding.
Yeah, I would say I don't work a ton with students in their application process, or maybe part of it is just students are kind of It's not academic related, so it may not like bring it up to me. But students are certainly going through that process and looking for externships and things like that. I feel like kind of what I mentioned before, just the hesitation around disclosure is a big thing. Like, when do I disclose? Do I have to disclose? What happens after I disclose? So sometimes we'll have conversations around that. Just around like, are you thinking you'll want accommodations for the interview? If so, that can be a meaningful time then to disclose. We could also talk about like, what information do you want to disclose? You don't necessarily need to disclose your full kind of life story and everything about oneself, but like, what is the information that your employer needs to know in order to provide a reasonable accommodations? And also, does the student have ideas as to what would be helpful for them during an interview or during their place of employment? So I think that's really where a lot of the questions are centered around.
And then just for both of you, if people are looking to be better, right? I learned a lot, frankly, when Tim came to work with me, and I had blind spots that I was not aware of before. If people are looking to be more aware or more proactive about learning more about some of these things so that they can be better humans and better members of our legal community, do you have any, what can we do?
Tim, I'll let you answer that first if you have anything.
Sounds good. I think, so for me, with everything being so remote and we're all going online, I think staying online and everything is done online. Paying attention to the web content accessibility guidelines, the WCAG standards, would be really good on how to properly build your website, and like what I was talking earlier with having things tagged correctly with the file type so that it works for all types of assistive technology. Okay.
Yeah, that's great. And that's, where can people find that? If we just Google it, will it come up, Tim?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And then Molly, was there any resources you could point us to or things like that?
I think the only thing that comes to mind right now is to ask questions, start with curiosity, be open-minded, not to assume that somebody needs help or support because they have disclosed a disability, but to ask first before immediately providing support or help. Each person is different, and every disabled person is different. So what one person needs is going to look different than another person. So I would say just ask, and then do your best to be accommodating.
Thank you. And I can tell, the folks here, just from my own experience and the homework that I was doing last year, there's a disability resource, there's disability resource center on campus, right? That probably has a lot of links and information on it, but there's a local organization. Tim, now I'm blanking on the name. Where was that? Where we met with David as one of the directors, right? I can't remember the name of it.
The Minnesota Council on Disability.
That's right. Yes. So they have a lot of information and things like that available too. If you're just looking for more to know, even, what are the laws and then obviously the ADA is a great resource for knowing what is and isn't permitted. And if you are an attorney providing services to clients, what accommodations you are required to make. So I want to thank our panelists so much for being with us. And before anybody goes, I know Corey wanted to announce what our next event would be, but I want to give our panelists, just if you guys have any final thoughts that you'd like to share.
Just thank you for having me. It was great to be here.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. And I think it's kind of ironic that we are having accessibility issues on the accessibility panel.
I know. I'm so bad about that, Tim. Thank you so much for.
That was not your fault. That seems to be something on Zoom's end.
All right, Corey.
But if anyone actually has questions for me going forward, if you want to give out my email address, Sarah, I'm fine with that.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you for being available. I do have Tim's contact information and Molly's as well. If anybody has any further questions based on something from the presentation or something more general, let me know.
And if you want CLE credit for this, please put your email in the chat.
Yes, Dan is maintaining our list. Thank you, Dan.
All right, I just want to mention our next event, and I don't really get a chance to introduce Sarah at all, but it'd probably take more time than we have because she's done so much, but she practices Social Security disability law since 2014 and very active in PAD, former District 10 Justice. She's very active in the state bar. You know, it'd be easier to talk about what she doesn't do. She's an avid runner. She does everything. So it'd be great to have her give a talk one of these days as well. But thank you, Molly and Tim. That was very informative. I love these panels. Our last event of the calendar year is going to be Wednesday, December 1st at noon with our very own Mike Knoller. And he'll be talking about finances and budgeting from law school to the experienced lawyer. So that should be a really useful, practical seminar for people at all levels, people dealing with law school loans, becoming a new lawyer and paying off your debt, then figuring out your benefits and your budgeting, and then to the experienced lawyers who are starting to plan for retirement, things like that. So stay tuned for more details on that one. Thanks everyone for coming. This video should be available, and then I'll turn it back over to Sarah for any closing thoughts.
I just want to say I have been to Mike's presentation on that topic before, and it is it's very easy to, most of the time when I go to those, I feel so overwhelmed with like the things that I need to do and I'm not doing, but he's really great. He gives very smart, very practical tips. So I highly recommend that. And just thanks to everybody again for coming today. We're going to kind of hopefully be able to do some more programming on this disability side of things. So if anybody has a specific topic that's disability related that you'd like to see our group do, please reach out and let me know, because I'm happy to do that. Otherwise, plan to see some more of this, because I think, I think that while diversity programming is becoming more prevalent, I think that when it comes to disability, it's still largely untouched in a lot of ways, partly I think because of the stigma that Molly was mentioning. So thank you so much to everybody who made the time to be here today, or if you're watching this on the recorded video, we're glad to have you. If you have any thoughts or issues, you guys, most of you know how to reach me. So otherwise, thanks so much for coming. And the statewide chapter was very proud to present this to you today.